This video is going to be my first preview for the Ravens-Steelers Week 5 matchup in Pittsburgh. From a Ravens fan's perspective, I'm able to track all Ravens offensive plays, all Lions offensive plays now at this point. It's very difficult to get every single snap labeled and organized in our database for opposing teams. So in this case, we utilized Week 1 against the 49ers, Week 3 against the Raiders, and Week 4 against the Texans. In terms of our data, ended up with 86 plays in the database. A little unsatisfactory for me because the Steelers have actually run 219 plays this year, but their data is a little bit skewed in terms of run pass because there's been two games, the 49ers in Week 1, the Texans in Week 4, where I think the run pass ratio was a little bit skewed. But we know the Steelers offense has been disappointing from a Steelers fan's perspective. Inconsistent as well. Even one of the games that they won against the Browns, we're talking about two defensive touchdowns that were scored by the Steelers, Highsmith and Watt, and then a long pass play to Pickens that he broke. It's not like there was multiple sustained drives in that game. This Steelers offense has been a disappointment, and Matt Canada's been under fire and garnering a lot of attention and criticism, rightfully so. So what I'll do in this preview is show two specific formations and personnel groups that the Steelers are using a lot to kind of give you a heads up as a Ravens fan and maybe what to look for. Now, unfortunately, the broadcast angle does not show us the personnel grouping. So when I talk about personnel groupings, it does require some pre-snap attention from the fan. If I give you the 12 personnel data, which is 20 plays in our database, 12 runs, 8 pass. Of those 20 plays, only 2 have been on third down. One was a 3rd and 1 run concept, and then the other was a 3rd and 6 pass play. So really, you're not going to see 12 personnel on third down. What does that leave you with? The majority of the plays that we've seen across those 3 games is 11 personnel. I think we've got 57 instances of 11 personnel in the database, and that data, that run-pass balance is really skewed. 57 plays, 14 runs, 43 passes. Part of that is a byproduct of the them being behind in games or behind the chains, 3rd and 8, going 11 personnel to throw the ball, which is what you have to do. Try to spread the field out horizontally and give the quarterback multiple options. Let him work through the progressions. They have not been consistent with the run game at all. Therefore, the data is pretty skewed for run pass for what we have and for what they have overall. So I had to consult ESPN data, look at each game, and then add it up myself because that's the kind of person I am. I don't want to go look at someone else's aggregated data. I know that will be faster, but that's just the way I am. So I consulted ESPN and looked at week 1, 2, 3, and 4. And what we came up with was 219 plays overall for the Steelers, 87 runs, 132 passes. So you're talking about 40% run and 60% pass. Roughly similar to what we have seen. Now, one point I would try to make is that is not the intention of this offense, in my opinion. The Steelers' offense is not designed, created, and not trying to be 40% run and 60% pass. I would offer to you, my suspicion is they'd like to be 46-54 run to pass, or maybe even 48-52 run to pass, depending on the situation. Unfortunately, in 2 of the games, they've really had difficulty getting a run game going at all. Week 1 against the 49ers, of course, fell behind early. Only had 10 rushing attempts total to 46 passes. Too far, heavily balanced towards the pass. Week 2 against the Browns, the 26-22 win where they had 2 defensive touchdowns. 21 rushes for 55 yards. So not able to generate much at all. The last 2 weeks, things have gotten better, but still have not been good enough from a Steelers fan's perspective, I'm sure, and from the Steelers staff that they would want to generate more than the 31 rushes for 105 yards they had against the Raiders. And then 25, the best they've done so far this year was last week against the Texans, 25 rushes for 114 yards. What we'll do here first in terms of film is we'll go over 12 personnel stuff, and I'll talk about their main formation. Again, it's 12 runs and 8 passes, so skewed towards the run. And this is going to be the main formation I'll talk about first, and I will refer to some film from last year. It's 12 personnel, twin wing. So technically this is a slot down here. So I'm getting away with calling this twin wing, and it's really slot wing. But this is part of Matt Canada's offense. Is quarterback under center, running back in the ace, single back, two tight ends to one side, two receivers to the other. In this case, this receiver is tightly aligned, so technically he's a slot. This is the only instance of pass that I have on the film that I have from 2022 and 23 at all out of this formation. Every other play, and I'm talking about 16 out of 17, combining 2022 and 2023 data from this formation with two tight ends stacked on one side, two receivers to the other, regardless of how close that second receiver is. This is the only instance of a pass play that I have at all. So if you're a Ravens fan, when they line up in this formation, it's 12 personnel, you got to be thinking our guys are jacked up to stop the run here, because that's what you're going to get the majority of the time. While the run game has been inconsistent this year, when they've had opportunities to get Najee Harris a little bit of seam, he's been able to generate yards. Jaylen Warren, I think, has shown his explosiveness as well, and certainly both of those guys had moments against the Ravens last year in the return bout in Week 17 that was a really disappointing loss for the Ravens, clearly. Most of their runs have looked like this one, and I do suspect that Darnell Washington has lined up incorrectly here, because you can see Kenny Pickett tells him to get over to the other side, so we would call this twin wing A, meaning it's shotgun, so now the quarterback is not under center, and you have a very clear stacked twins over to the side. It has clearly hurt the Steelers' offense, by the way, not having Deontay Johnson available, but most runs have looked like this that I have seen, regardless of formation. A lot of congestion down in there, difficulty comboing, and then staying on the combo and not letting the D-tackle, who was being comboed a moment ago, get involved in the tackle. It does end up being a 4-yard gain. This formation for us this year is 7 runs and 1 pass. Again, 12 personnel was 12 runs and 8 pass. But this particular formation is 7 runs and 1 pass. The 1 pass I showed you to lead off this film study look. And last year, like I said, not a single instance of a pass play out of that formation. 49ers did a great job shutting down the run game almost completely. You're looking at a situation where when they line up with two tight ends and the running back behind the quarterback, the Ravens should be jacked up to stop 3 particular plays. The jet sweep, the dive off the jet sweep, and the split zone, which I'll show you 2 of those here in a moment using 2022 film. This is still 12 personnel, but now you've got 1 tight end on each side. So for me, we would call this ace. If you have a different terminology that you're aware of and you've utilized before, by all means, refer to it as that. I'm just giving people personnel terminology who don't have a football background and maybe don't hear any of that conversation from football announcers, people that are on the broadcast. But it's a great throw by Kenny Pickett. I thought in the preseason he threw the ball exceptionally well, particularly on the move. That has just not translated to the regular season at all. The film that I have seen, I have not seen consistency from their offensive line, from a run blocking standpoint, nor from a pass standpoint. It seems to me as if Kenny Pickett is under too much pressure to make plays with his feet at times. Let's get to a little bit of the film from 2022. I'm transitioning over to my other playlist. My apologies. If you think that, you may say, well, the Ravens defense is playing great this year, and I don't think that stuff is going to work on us. That's fine if you want to say that, and I kind of hold the same opinion, but all I know is it did work last year. Under center, jet stuff, and the zone opposite of it worked really well for Matt Canada's offense in Baltimore last year when they were able to come down and get a win. And that was a huge win for them, and a huge win for us. A huge loss for us, missed opportunity. We were able to go to Cincinnati the next week needing a win for any chance to win the division. Of course, it was an unusual circumstance because of the situation with DeMar Hamlin and the Buffalo Bills. But 2 instances of the jet sweep tearing us up to the tight end wing side. Now, this case happens to be 11 personnel, so Matt Canada will run this, 21 personnel, He will run this out of multiple personnel groupings. It doesn't seem like an 11 personnel group. When you see Jaylen Warren and Najee Harris on the field at the same time, you can bet that you're probably going to get some variation of the jet sweep, like I've shown you on these last 2 plays, or the jet, and then a late handoff to Najee Harris, which we had trouble with that last year as well. I do believe this Ravens defense is better and of a better quality than last year's overall, but last year's defense was playing quite well by the end of the year also. So it's not like we can absolve blame of all of those guys and Mike McDonald for the yards and the big plays they did give up to the Steelers at home in Week 17. This is an example of the jet by Warren and two potential blockers pulling defenders out of the box. And look at the numbers, what it does here. You've got 5 blockers for the Steelers, for 6 defenders for the Ravens, and then the ball carrier. So it's a 6-on-6. If you were to count the quarterback, you'd say it's a 7-on-6, with the quarterback potentially being a guy that could boot off of this. They don't run the boot out of this formation, though, which is interesting to me because I think they've set up the jet and the jet dive, very well at times, like this game last year, and the boot play action off of it I think would be available. By the way, the Ravens are running this jet dive stuff. I'll try to cover it in Sunday morning's preview, but that's a first look at the personnel, 12 personnel, and the main formation from 12 personnel that I would give you a heads up to look for on Sunday afternoon. Where I think this game will really get interesting is the strategy that the Steelers use, whether they choose to go heavy personnel, 12 personnel, without Freiermuth playing, presumably using Darnell Washington and Connor Hayward, or whether they choose to get the Ravens' base defense off the field and go 11 personnel. There has been some moments in the past 2 years where they've been able to run the ball out of 11 personnel against our nickel defense. Historically, in my opinion, the Ravens' defense has struggled with 11 personnel run fits. This year, that has not been the case, although we did have some difficulty against the Colts. I would refer back to that game to some of the concepts they ran and when we were unable to set the edge and force the ball inside. I'm going to focus on the main formation that's being used the most by the Steelers, and that's twin slot. Again, there are 11 personnel data. We have 57 plays, 14 run plays. So predominantly pass-oriented from 11 personnel. Part of that, like I said a couple times before, is because of the game situation. But I want to, before I show the 11 personnel plays and talk about it, I want to remind you of last year, the Week 17 game. This Steelers team, with very similar personnel and scheme, came into Baltimore and ran 41 times for 198 yards. Najee Harris had 22 carries for 111, caught the game-winning touchdown pass also. And Jaylen Warren had 12 carries for 76. So I think it's interesting, or possible, I guess I should say, that instead of trying to replace Freiermuth with another tight end, maybe they try to replace Freiermuth with a running back and utilize Warren and Harris on the field at the same time, 6 or 8 times a game, utilize the jet sweep game that we've kind of already talked about. Let's get to the film. 11 personnel stuff. Like I said, the main formation that we're talking about is twin slot. So for those of you that don't watch my channel a lot, that's the twin side. And then the slot side is typically the tight end side. The tight end is in the slot. This is A because the running back is on the same side. B iterations will be when the running back is on the opposite side. 11 personnel run stuff is where I think it'll be interesting. If they can generate 40 to 45 or maybe 50 yards running the ball out of 11 personnel, keeping us honest, it'll be interesting to see how the Ravens can match that. Are we forced to use Kyle Hamilton down as that nickel defender? But the way that teams line up twin slot to the boundary, you're not going to have the nickel defender down here anyway. Where the tight end and the running back is, the nickel defender is going to be up here to the field, which is what you see right here by the Texans. So this little game within the game, 11 personnel run to the boundary, I think is where, if the Ravens can shut that out and not let the Steelers generate any yards on those concepts, run or pass plays to the boundary out of 11 personnel, goes a long way to putting this Steelers defense back up against, Steelers offense back up against the wall, being as they're missing 2 of their main talents. All right, this is a 2nd and 10, or another run play out of 11 personnel. So now this should look very similar to the stuff that we just showed you. This is going to look similar to the twin wing, where you have a jet motion and then dive off of it. The 11 personnel run game from under center formation could also be something that the Steelers look at utilizing, except I would say that the man in motion there would possibly be Jaylen Warren with a 21 personnel grouping, except it's instead of having 1 tailback and 1 fullback, you would have basically 2 tailbacks in Warren and Harris at the same time. That could be their answer. One thing I think they'll do, or at least attempt to do, because of the Ravens' ability to be multiple or show multiple looks on defense on third down. This is a 3rd and 8, by the way, twin slot stack, is give Kenny Pickett multiple options on the same play. Really cool. I call a half mesh. You got underneath route here, running back in the flats, and then a sit route in the middle of the field. So he can read this however he wants, probably right to left with the check down being to that side. Ends up, that says a 3-yard gain earlier. That was actually a 7-yard gain. Pickett appears to be looking over here. One thing I like about this, and the reason why I'm mentioning this play again, is this play is to the boundary in terms of the check down. 11 personnel, running back into the boundary, tight end to the field. That game within the game, how we defend the boundary, normally is going to be Patrick Queen. Last year on the game-winning touchdown pass to Najee Harris, for whatever reason, it was Roquan Smith, who of course got beat. All right, 11 personnel late in the half, I believe, so that's why you see the 49ers in such off coverage. This is a nice throw from the other hash. It's complete to Allen Robinson, who's another wild card, if you ask me. Guy who had a big season, I think, 3 years ago, and has not had the statistical impact in the same way. Kenny Pickett, this is a strong throw from the other hash all the way down outside the numbers. Soft coverage, they're giving up yards. At this point, they had really taken control of the game. Second drive, rewind in time here a little bit. 2 screen plays, how they could utilize Austin. If they don't use him on the jet sweep stuff, like we've already covered a lot, then it could be screens. And I've got 3 instances of them so far. 2 of which you're getting like short gains like this. I think these will be opportunities to get their offensive linemen out in front, utilize an irregular play. We've been pretty good on screens this year. 2022, I think it's well documented. We were not particularly early in the season. We got better as the year went on. That Ravens defense last year really improved dramatically over the course of the year. This year we've started off playing at an incredibly high level, and that's without Odafe Owe, David Ojabo, Marlon Humphrey, and Marcus Williams, only one of which is probably going to come back on Sunday. Last iteration here of this, you're going to get a slot screen to Austin. Again, twin slot formation. It's going to have the running back into the boundary, tight end to the field, and there's nothing here. I expect to see the Ravens defense look comparable to the 49ers and Texans, if you ask me. I mean, if you were to look at the quality of players we have and the results that we've put out there, I think we've allowed 55 points through 4 games. We definitely have the ability to go out there and take away the run from this team and force them to be one-dimensional, or at least get them into third downs, which we'll talk about next. All right, so now that we've looked at some of the favorite personnel groupings and maybe formations that the Steelers might use, let's talk about them on third downs. They're at 36% conversion rate on third downs so far through 4 games. From the film that we have, we've seen a lot of 3rd and 5, 3rd and 6, 3rd and 7s that have just been unsuccessful. I will show you 3 successful ones. A big play by Calvin Austin against the Raiders, and then 1 scramble by Pickett to show you that he does have some mobility. By the way, the Ravens offense is at 47% third down conversion rate, to let you know. So far, only 9 teams are lower than the Steelers on third down conversion rate. That doesn't mean necessarily that that's going to carry over into this game. It'll be the Ravens' defense job to put them in 3rd and long or 3rd and medium, and then to get the stop to get off the field. I thought last year in the Week 17 win in Baltimore, I thought Kenny Pickett showed some real poise and ability to get the ball to the correct matchup and keep drives going. Of course, he had Deontay Johnson available for that game, and Deontay Johnson hasn't played since Week 1, and now Pat Freiermuth is out till at least after the bye, which is the following week after they play the Ravens. If you recall, his game-winning touchdown pass to Najee Harris versus Roquan Smith was on a third down. So let's take a look at the film from this year on some third downs. I think I'll show you 6 of them. This first one is going to be a sack, Week 1 versus the 49ers. Fast and physical defense that we would hope as Ravens fans we're similar to. It's a 3rd and 5. There's just not enough time to work to get the ball to Pickens down at the bottom side of the screen in this one-on-one, where you'd have the opportunity to at least get the ball up to him at some point. You can see a safety dropping down to take Freiermuth. Possibility to maybe work up to this, but time doesn't permit it because there's pressure in his face by the D tackle. And that's been one of the themes, if you ask me, from the film that I've seen, is when guys are available to throw him the football, there's not time. And when there is time, in many cases, there's no one open. Next one, this is going to be their second drive against the 49ers. Interception. Seems to be a ball that comes out high from Pickett's hand, if you ask me. Now, there is a D-tackle in his face a little bit. This is going to be down to the bottom side of the screen, by the way. Wide receiver does kind of slip, but at best, to me, this is going to be a 50-50 ball, somewhere in that range, and we'll show you the end zone angle so you can take a look at it. From a Steelers offense perspective, things just haven't looked smooth at all, which is kind of surprising to me because they looked so overwhelming when they were on the field for the first team offense, at least in the preseason. I think they were 5 for 5 scoring touchdowns with Kenny Pickett on the field and looked like they were ready to come out, guns a-blazing, and then they get blown out in week 1 by the 49ers, who are clearly an excellent defense. Incomplete pass to Pickens here on an in route. From a Ravens perspective, can we get the Steelers in these situations? And when we do get them in these situations, this is a 3rd and 8. Most of the possessions I have, to be honest with you, in a database is early in games. We usually try to get at least the first half and then 1 or 2 possessions in the third quarter. Just because of sheer storage size, we can't get every single play from every single game. I wish to be able to have the storage space, number one, and the time to do that at some point in the future, but that's just not the case right now. And then when we do get them in these situations, can we cover them? The Ravens have covered quite well this year. Look, losing Marcus Peters, who you'll see show up on the film here in a moment, Ronald Darby and Rock Ya-Sin have done a great job on that left side. Marlon Humphrey hasn't played a snap, and Brandon Stephens has been up to the task so far. You would have to think that guys like Austin and or Pickens would be in the game plan for the Steelers to go against Brandon Stephens, but he's been up to the task. This is a wheel route on a 3rd and 6. Seems like a perfect opportunity against man coverage to get Austin the football, and they're just not able to get his man screened at all. Freiermuth doesn't get a piece of him. The defender's able to stay with him. That doesn't mean they haven't won any single 3rd downs. I want to make sure I present some balance here. I mean, they're 36% on 3rd downs. It's not terrible. There are 9 teams lower than them on 3rd down, but everyone within 5 teams below them and 5 teams above them is within 3%. So if they come out against the Ravens in week 5 and have a great day running the ball and get to a bunch of 3rd and 2, 3rd and 3s and convert 55, 60% of them, they're probably looking at getting a win, number one. And number two, they're going to be moving up in that 3rd down percentage across the NFL. This is a 3rd and 8. Tough route by Pickens, if you ask me. It's not a contested catch because he wins the route. There's a lot of contact here right around the 33. And then he wins over the middle, which is what he can do. They're going to have to rely on him, I believe, on these 3rd downs without Freiermuth, without Deontay Johnson, which I think is a big loss. The physicality and the size of Pickens, the ability to play through some of this contact. If Kenny Pickett will stand in there and have a little bit of extra time to get him the football, which the Ravens D-line and linebackers don't want to allow him, that would give the Steelers the opportunity to extend some drives. Now, here's the big one, the type of play that we would like to avoid, clearly. 3rd and 7, 3rd drive. Austin against former Raven Marcus Peters. It's man, no safety help, and Peters is just beat really badly up the middle of the field. Austin's a burner. We know that. They use him on jet sweeps. They use him on return motion stuff. He's a guy that could break open something like this easily if the coverage doesn't stay tight to him and we don't have some safety help that's paying attention to his side. You can imagine if they had Freiermuth and if they had Deontay Johnson, it's a totally different dynamic to deal with. They'll be operating from a deficit from their talent standpoint in terms of what they would be overall, what they will be capable of completely healthy versus what they'll have available to them in week 5. One other point that I want to try to cover is what the Ravens will do with their 3 safety group, their nickel 4-2-5 against 11 personnel. Presumably Marcus Williams is going to play with Geno Stone and Kyle Hamilton being available. It makes sense that Kyle Hamilton will be the guy playing the nickel position. He had tremendous success doing that last year, and in the last 2 weeks when he's been used there, has played pretty much lights out. Of course, he had 3 sacks against the Browns, did have an interception. 3 sacks against the Colts, did have an interception against the Browns. Let's get to a little bit of film. The Ravens have played good defense on 3rd downs, but I'm going to try to focus a little bit on Kyle Hamilton, to be honest with you, in terms of where he's played and what he kind of takes away. Ball's on the right hash against the Colts. He's the nickel defender to the field. And one thing he's brilliant at doing is taking away screens, whether it's a slot screen or a tunnel screen. His size, athleticism, and burst allows him to get on top of the point of attack faster than it's drawn up by the offensive coach's blocking scheme. It's one thing we used to talk about is like they draw the play up a certain way with the gap being a certain location. But if you get there faster than the blocking scheme does, you can condense that hole. And Kyle Hamilton's frame, his size, his burst, and commitment to staying on the outside really condenses this hole and allows the inside-out pursuit to potentially get there, even if the receiver, which I think is Pittman in this case, is able to turn that back inside. Again, at the nickel position, and this is what I would anticipate the Steelers possibly going to if we do play Hamilton at the nickel is put Calvin Austin or Robinson in the slot to the field and try to attack him with some outbreaking routes. Try to attack him with some... I don't think you can beat Kyle Hamilton with simple one-cut moves. Even this one, it does beat him. I think it's a 5 or 6 yard gain. When he has been susceptible, it's been to moves that start on the outside and then come back inside, or vice versa. Start on the inside and then come back outside. That's my observation. In terms of alignment or deployment for the Steelers, it would mean putting the tight end into the boundary. Again, without Freiermuth, we would presume that would be Darnell Washington or Connor Hayward. The matchup of Hamilton to the field against the screen game, against the run game out of 11 personnel, and then covering Austin or Robinson in the slot, I think would be a matchup we would need to win. What would be the benefits to doing so? Against the run, his burst and his range allows him to sneak down outside of the blocking scheme, behind the blocking scheme, and get involved in tackles to limit that run game. Put that Steelers offense, if there are an 11 personnel on first down or 2nd and 8 or 2nd and 7, and they choose to run the ball, put them in third down situations where Mike McDonald can use simulated pressures, can drop people out, kind of confuse Kenny Pickett or at least slow down his progression, his understanding of what's happening. And Kyle Hamilton, if you ask me, seems like the guy to do that off the edge from the nickel position, reading run pass, reacting to screens, reacting to outs, and enfolding inside, unblocked against the run game, as you see film here against the Colts. All right, some of these guys have played extremely well on the outside. Stevens, Darby, Rock Ya-Sin, they've been involved in the coverage, multiple coverage concepts. Roquan Smith, Patrick Queen, if you ask me, will be a big asset for the Ravens in this game. We have interceptions against them last year, both of them on the road in the first game. And Roquan Smith, I thought, adjusted really well early on to the pass game, to the field, over the middle of the field, I should say. We're going to miss Darryl Worley, don't get me wrong, but Geno Stone brings that physical element as well. Marcus Williams is committed. Hamilton, Williams, and Stone on the field with Ya-Sin and Stevens, or Darby and Stevens is probably our best group right now. All of those guys at outside corner have been pretty sticky in their coverage and given the Ravens an opportunity to play multiple coverages, show different platforms to quarterbacks, and put them in positions where they've got to process things quickly before the pass rush can get there. Kyle Van Noy being added to the pass rush group, I think, is a huge boost for the Ravens. With Ojabo being out for a while, who knows what the status is of Odafe Owe. We're going to rely, it seems like, on Jadeveon Clowney and Kyle Van Noy to play out there. Thought Van Noy looked spectacular out on the edge. This Ravens defense has the ability to go out there and slow down, if not outright stop, the Steelers' run game. I think the under center twin wing jet game is what Matt Canada's got to see if he can get involved. And like we covered earlier, that might mean utilizing Jaylen Warren and Najee Harris at the same time on the field together, with Warren presumably going in the jet motion and Harris being utilized as the dive guy opposite or on the split zone. I think they've got to get to some pass concepts out of that because last year they didn't do that at all, and Mike McDonald had to be looking at that in the offseason, and now with the Steelers offense struggling as, hey, this looks like a natural thing that Matt Canada might go to because it's concepts he's familiar with. He's been running since college, to some criticism by Steelers fans, clearly. And then the 11 personnel run game and screen game. I think Kyle Hamilton is the guy to play the nickel this week and get out there in some space read it and react and be kind of like a force multiplier. I really like him and Roquan Smith next to each other to the field, and then Patrick Queen to the boundary. That seems to be our best deployment so far. George Pickens is an X factor to me. George Pickens being able to make unscheduled catches along the sideline, deep down the field, from the bottom of the numbers to the sideline, where it's it's going to be one-on-one pretty much no matter what coverage you play. He's the X factor, the guy that against Brandon Stevens, against Ronald Darby, against Rock Ya-Sin, Steelers fans will look at and say, we like that matchup, and no question. I would agree with them in their assessment of saying that. Personally, I can't wait to see Rock Ya-Sin line up against George Pickens, because Rock Ya-Sin is a physical guy, and he has the core strength to stand up to some of that stuff, as you witnessed by him against Jamar Chase, basically ripping the ball out on that back shoulder fade in the end zone in week 2. Appreciate you guys' time. If you enjoyed this preview, please let me know in the comment section. Trying to get a Ravens offense versus Steelers defense one out on Sunday morning. That's the one that's a little more in depth from the standpoint of referring to historical ways that the Steelers have covered Lamar Jackson and how Todd Monken's offense is kind of breaking that mold, and it, I think, is going to put the Steelers defense in a tremendous bind or a lot of conflict if they continue to try to do some of the things on defense that they've done in the past. Appreciate you guys' time. Let me know what you think of the video in the comment section. If you think other Ravens fans or maybe even Steelers fans would enjoy this content, this preview look at the Steelers offense versus the Ravens defense, please consider grabbing a link to this video, sharing it out on social media to help this content get more reach.